Between the years 1647 and 1685, more than 300 wills were executed in the small colonial settlement of Newfield, Connecticut. Strangely, all of them were processed through the same three men, each bearing the same surname, Pemberton. But what disturbed historians wasn't just the number of these documents, it was what was found beneath the floorboards of the Pemberton family home. Hundreds of tiny glass vials, each containing trace amounts of opium and belladonna. Alongside them, journals, meticulously written, detailing the divine visions experienced by colonists just before their deaths. Visions that, in a suspicious twist of fate, always seemed to justify the transfer of property, wealth, and influence to the Pemberton family. In total, 23 individuals died within mere days of signing their wills, each reportedly experiencing what witnesses described as a rapturous communion with the divine. The records were sealed away by colonial authorities. Not to protect the innocent, but to protect the colony's reputation. A scandal of this nature, they feared, would shake public trust in both the church and the governance of early New England. Before we continue with the chilling tale of the Pemberton family, if you're brave enough to explore the darker corners of American history, make sure to subscribe to our channel. This kind of content isn't for everyone, only for those unafraid to confront the shadows of the past. Also, let us know in the comments, which state are you listening from? It's fascinating to see how far these forgotten truths are spreading. Now, back to Colonial, Connecticut, where our story begins. The case remained buried in dusty archives until 1998, when a Yale researcher stumbled upon a set of sealed documents in a long-forgotten collection. What he uncovered may represent early America's most sinister case of systematic inheritance fraud. What stood out most were the painstakingly detailed notes left by the Pembertons. Records of their victims' final moments, many while under the influence of powerful narcotics. And within these notes, transcriptions of their dying words, rambling, religious utterances that, upon closer analysis, showed a disturbing pattern of manipulation through carefully planted theological suggestions. What follows is the true account of the Pemberton family's decades-long campaign of deception, psychological control, and, perhaps, cold-blooded murder. Did the Pembertons simply exploit religious fervor and medical ignorance in a time of desperation? Or was there something far darker at play in colonial Newfield? The truth, as you're about to hear, is far more disturbing than most historical accounts have dared to reveal. Before we delve deeper into this unnerving tale, if you're enjoying these forgotten chronicles of America's dark past, don't forget to subscribe and join our community of historical mystery seekers. And again, tell us, where are you listening from? Let's return now to the year 1647. Newfield was a struggling, isolated settlement on the Connecticut frontier. Founded by strict Puritans who believed even the mainstream colonies had grown too lenient, the community consisted of fewer than 60 families, their homes clustered around a simple meeting house that served as both church and governing hall. That winter was one of the harshest in memory. Food was scarce. Disease spread quickly. Spirits were low. And it was in this desperate moment that three strangers arrived, brothers, bearing the name Peyton, Obadiah, Jeremiah, and Cornelius. They claimed to have come from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, armed with glowing letters of recommendation from respected Boston clergy and officials. But those documents were forgeries. Painstakingly crafted, the brothers had spent months studying the handwriting and seal designs of real colonial authorities, details that would have gone unquestioned in a community so remote and desperate. They didn't arrive in Newfield by accident. They had targeted it. The brothers identified it as ideal ground for their scheme, isolated, plagued by hardship, and starved for leadership. Obadiah Peyton, the eldest at 34, presented himself as a physician trained in the latest medical practices of London. With his black leather case of tools, a solemn demeanor, and a well-kept beard, he quickly became indispensable. A formally trained physician was a rare blessing in early America, and the people of Newfield believed his arrival to be nothing short of divine intervention. At 32, the middle brother, Reverend Jeremiah Pemberton, was a minister educated at Cambridge before crossing the ocean to the New World. Tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to pierce through rather than rest upon a person, he spoke with a quiet but unwavering authority on matters of Scripture and salvation. His sermons, delivered in a mesmerizing cadence that could stretch for hours without faltering, earned the admiration of even the most devout Puritans in Newfield. The youngest brother, Cornelius Pemberton, age 29, presented himself as a man trained in law, well versed in the nuances of colonial legislation and meticulous record-keeping. Unlike his more austere siblings, Cornelius exuded a worldly sophistication. His attire, though modest by Puritan standards, was of noticeably finer quality, and he carried himself with the practiced confidence of one used to holding power. Within months of their arrival, the town council appointed him as magistrate, responsible for witnessing and recording the legal affairs of the settlement. The three Pemberton brothers took residence in a house that had stood empty since the Wilton family perished in a winter fever the year before. Situated slightly apart from the rest of the settlement, the two-story wooden home, with its rare stone foundation and multiple rooms, was one of the largest structures in Newfield. Most families lived crowded in single-room dwellings, but the Pembertons immediately set about expanding their quarters. Cornelius had a study fitted for his legal work, Obadiah, a skilled healer, a room converted into a makeshift apothecary, and Reverend Jeremiah claimed a private chamber dedicated solely to prayer and contemplation. What set the Pembertons apart in the eyes of many, however, was not their education or their professions, but the fact that none of them brought wives or children. When questioned, they answered with solemn conviction that their lives were devoted not to family, but to divine service. "Our calling," Jeremiah would say with serene gravity, "is to tend God's flock, not to raise our own." In a town where piety and selfless service were among the highest virtues, this vow of celibacy stirred little suspicion. On the contrary, the brothers quickly became pillars of the community. Obadiah was tireless in his care for the sick, often remaining at ailing bedsides for days. Jeremiah provided spiritual solace, his prayers and scripture readings bringing comfort to the afflicted and their families. Cornelius handled all legal matters, from property disputes to contract witnessing, with meticulous diligence. The first person to benefit from what later came to be called the Pembertons' preparation for death was goodwife Sarah Holcomb. A widow of one of Newfield's founding families, she had inherited a sizable estate on the eastern edge of town, 60 cleared acres, a sturdy home, a barn, and livestock. When she fell ill with what Obadiah diagnosed as consumption of the lungs, the Pemberton brothers took a notable interest in her care. For weeks, they visited her daily. Obadiah administered tinctures and powders to ease her suffering. Jeremiah led prayers and read scripture. Cornelius attended to her legal affairs, helping arrange her will and estate in what seemed a gesture of kindness. The townspeople saw no reason for concern. Sarah was a wealthy widow with no close kin. It was only proper, they thought, for the town's moral and civic leaders to ensure her comfort in her final days. What the community did not witness were the private sessions held after others had departed. According to a journal later discovered in the Pemberton house, Sarah Holcomb became the first subject of what Obadiah called the Elixir of Divine Sight, a murky brown liquid administered in gradually increasing doses. The mixture induced delirious states the brothers would later describe to others as spiritual rapture. One entry reads, "The widow requires 15 drops initially, her body weakened by grief and age. Jeremiah shall introduce the notion of divine instruction concerning her estate." A second entry, 3 days later. The widow responds favorably to any mention of her late husband. Once the elixir has taken hold, Jeremiah need only suggest that her husband awaits her in heaven and desires to speak on matters of their former holdings. She is most pliable when presented with such visions. Cornelius, for his part, prepared documents in advance, contracts, transfers, wills, all with ample blank space to be filled in later, as divine inspiration dictated. During the carefully orchestrated final days of Sarah Holcomb, the three Pemberton brothers worked with methodical precision. Sarah, weakened and increasingly delirious, began to mutter fragmented phrases, visions of heaven, commands from divine voices, and celestial instructions. Cornelius was always nearby, quill in hand, recording her words as though transcribing sacred prophecy. These utterances, he later claimed, were Sarah's divinely inspired final wishes. Among the most significant of these wishes was the bequeathal of her entire estate to the Pemberton brothers, who, according to Cornelius, were chosen by God to use her property for his glory and to serve his people in Newfield. When Sarah died on December 14, 1647, her funeral drew the entire settlement. Jeremiah delivered a stirring eulogy, praising her generosity and spiritual insight. Cornelius then read aloud the will, one he had drafted, declaring that Sarah had received divine revelation in her final days, and that she had been granted clarity about how her earthly possessions should be used. In a Puritan community where divine visions were not only accepted but expected among the devout, few questioned the circumstances of the will. Instead, many took it as further evidence of the Pemberton brothers' extraordinary connection with God. After all, who else would a dying woman choose to carry out a divine mission? With ownership of the Holcomb property secured, the brothers established what they called a ministry of preparation, a special service for the dying. As word spread of Sarah's serene passing and sacred visions, other families began requesting the brothers' presence when their loved ones grew ill. Each time, the pattern repeated, Obadiah would assess the sickness and administer his mysterious treatments. Jeremiah would offer spiritual comfort. Cornelius ensured that all legal and testamentary matters were handled. And always, just before death, they would administer their secret elixir. What followed was a series of trance-like visions, which Cornelius faithfully documented. The results were remarkably consistent. Each dying person seemed to express a desire to contribute to the Pembertons' ministry. By the spring of 1650, the brothers had acquired 4 more estates and emerged as the wealthiest family in Newfield. They hired laborers, built a larger home near the meeting house, and began influencing local governance. Their rising wealth drew little suspicion. They lived modestly, served the community devoutly, and frequently spoke of plans to build a proper church and school. They skillfully cultivated a reputation for humility and generosity, donating harvests to the poor, establishing a small charity for medicines, and funding improvements to the meeting house. These public acts of goodwill served as a smokescreen for their darker activities. With the community convinced of their piety, few dared to question their methods. When Elder William Fletcher, one of Newfield's leaders, privately expressed concern about the growing number of estates passing to the Pembertons, Jeremiah met him not with anger, but with solemn compassion. According to later accounts, Jeremiah suggested that such suspicions might reflect spiritual weakness. He offered to pray with Fletcher for protection against the devil's whispers. The manipulation worked. Fletcher left feeling ashamed of his doubts rather than vindicated by them. To further cement their influence, the brothers introduced Testimony Sundays, special services where witnesses to the divine visions of the deceased would share their experiences with the congregation. These public declarations served multiple purposes. They reinforced the authenticity of the brothers' claims, fostered social pressure against skepticism, and warned, without saying so, that doubt would be seen as a betrayal of the community's sacred experiences. By 1655, the Pembertons had solidified their hold on Newfield. Jeremiah was formally appointed as the settlement's minister. Cornelius served as both magistrate and official record-keeper. Obadiah's medical expertise went unquestioned. Together, they controlled Newfield's spiritual, legal, and physical well-being, a position that allowed their scheme to continue, hidden in plain sight. The strange pattern might have continued indefinitely, unnoticed and unchallenged, had it not been for the arrival of Constance Pemberton in the summer of 1664. 17 years after the Pemberton brothers had established themselves in Newfield, a carriage rolled into the settlement bearing a girl of about 16. She introduced herself as Obadiah's niece. Along with her came a letter explaining she was the daughter of a 4th Pemberton brother who had remained in England and had recently passed away, leaving Constance in the care of her uncles in the colonies. Tall and slender, With the same penetrating eyes as Jeremiah but a warmth wholly absent in her uncle's, Constance quickly became a beloved figure in Newfield. Unlike her stern, reserved guardians, she smiled easily and eagerly helped neighbors with chores and childcare. She attended prayer meetings dutifully, yet her devotion lacked Jeremiah's zeal, exhibiting instead a quiet, personal faith that many found refreshing. Her arrival marked a turning point in the Pemberton narrative. For the first time, an outsider had entered the secluded inner world of the three brothers, watching, listening, and bearing witness to their private lives. Though the brothers maintained their public personas in her presence, the cramped quarters of colonial life made secrecy difficult. Their reactions to her presence, later revealed through long-lost correspondence, were mixed. Obadiah viewed her as a liability, writing, "The girl observes too much and asks questions that reveal a dangerous cleverness." Jeremiah, ever conscious of appearances, noted, "Having a young female relative in the household will deflect certain inquiries about our lack of wives and lend us the air of familial respectability." Cornelius, the most pragmatic, saw both danger and opportunity. "We must either secure her loyalty absolutely or ensure she cannot damage our position. Her inheritance from her grandmother presents a substantial benefit if properly managed." Constance herself, in letters to a childhood friend back in England, discovered in a private collection in the 1990s, expressed grief over her father's death and gratitude toward her uncles. She described them as stern but not unkind, and the townsfolk of Newfield as pious, even severe, but generally welcoming. Her first suspicions began to form roughly 3 months after her arrival. While cleaning Obadiah's study, she discovered a hidden compartment in his medicine chest. Inside were vials containing strange substances unlike anything in his typical medical practice. The labels were written in an indecipherable code. When she asked about them, Obadiah reacted harshly, accusing her of snooping and warning her never to touch the special medicines, insisting they were dangerous compounds reserved for research. That incident might have faded into memory had it not been for what Constance witnessed the following month at the Thatcher farm. Thomas Thatcher, one of Newfield's wealthier farmers, had fallen ill with a fever. Obadiah declared the condition likely fatal. As was now routine, all three brothers tended to the man in his final days. Constance accompanied them, offering help with the Thatcher children. One afternoon, she happened to glance through a partially open door and saw Obadiah administer a dark, unfamiliar liquid to the ailing man, one not among his usual treatments. Within the hour, Thomas Thatcher began speaking in broken, ecstatic phrases, rambling about angels and messengers, eyes wide but unfocused. Cornelius sat beside him, recording every word with quill in hand, occasionally prompting him, "And does the Lord show you who should tend your northern fields, Thomas? Or who should inherit the mill you built last spring?" Disturbed but unsure what to make of it, Constance began paying closer attention. She began noticing patterns. The brothers always seemed to involve themselves with those who had land, assets, and, most critically, no direct heirs. Obadiah adjusted the dosage of his spiritual elixir based on the person's strength. Jeremiah interpreted their fevered hallucinations as divine revelations. And Cornelius, cold, meticulous Cornelius, transformed those ravings into legally binding declarations. Though her suspicions grew, Constance said nothing. As a young orphaned woman in colonial New England, what power did she have? Constance's position was perilous. Her uncles provided her with food, shelter, and a respected place within the Newfield community. To accuse them, especially without concrete proof, would not only endanger her security but risk being dismissed as nothing more than a woman's hysteria or, worse, seen as evidence of spiritual affliction in need of correction. So, instead of speaking out, she began her own careful investigation. She kept a small journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room, where she recorded names, dates, and subtle details. She volunteered to help Cornelius organize his growing archive of wills and property transfers, documents that had steadily enriched the Pemberton brothers over the years. With Obadiah, she assisted in the apothecary, learning to identify the preparations he reserved for select patients. And with Jeremiah, She listened closely during his private conversations, collecting fragments of their intentions and methods. The turning point came in the winter of 1665, 18 months after her arrival. A heavy snowstorm trapped the household indoors for days. Then, an urgent call to a dying elder pulled the brothers away despite the treacherous weather, leaving Constance alone. Seizing the opportunity, she conducted a thorough search of the house, focusing on the areas they always kept locked. In the cellar, behind a false wall hidden by stacked firewood, she found a secret room. Inside was damning evidence of her uncle's activities. One wall was lined with vials and jars of various substances. Another held stacks of journals, meticulously kept since their arrival in Newfield, detailing the treatments administered to dozens of dying colonists and the resulting visions that had ultimately enriched the Pemberton brothers. The hidden chamber housed a laboratory far beyond anything that should have existed in colonial New England: glass distillation equipment, botanical specimens preserved in alcohol, and carefully labeled raw materials. Obadiah's medical expertise, it seemed, far surpassed that of any frontier physician. Among the equipment were several items later identified by historians as stolen from university collections in England, evidence that the brothers' crimes likely predated their emigration to the colonies. Most chilling was a cabinet containing personal effects of past victims, locks of hair, bits of clothing, jewelry, and other intimate items, each labeled with a name and date. These weren't trophies. According to Obadiah's notes, they were components for highly personalized treatments, designed to resonate with the victim's bodily humors. The cold precision of their methods revealed a level of psychological detachment far beyond simple greed. But the discovery that truly shook her was a ledger in Cornelius's meticulous hand. It listed properties acquired, their values, and the total wealth accumulated from the scheme. On the final page, one entry struck like a bolt of ice. CP, inheritance from maternal grandmother, to be secured upon her 18th year. The initials were her own. With a dawning horror, Constance realized that she was intended to be their next victim. The snowstorm and her uncle's absence granted her precious time. She copied critical entries into her journal, carefully returned everything to its place, and began to plan her escape. According to her notes, she meant to flee to Hartford as soon as weather permitted, carrying her evidence to the colonial authorities. But the winter of 1665 to 1666 proved one of the harshest in New England history. Snowfall persisted for weeks, making travel impossible. While she waited, Constance continued gathering information. She witnessed several more deathbed ministrations and confirmed further disturbing details. More unsettling still was a subtle shift in her uncle's behavior. They asked after her health with increasing frequency, spoke of her future, and referenced her grandmother's estate, hinting at the inheritance awaiting her on her 18th birthday. The most alarming moment came one evening when she found Obadiah examining her personal belongings, her hairbrush, her drinking cup, the objects she used daily. When she questioned him, he smiled and said he feared she might be exhibiting early signs of the melancholy that had once afflicted her father. He simply wished, he said, to prepare preventative treatments. The explanation given, measured and seemingly caring, only deepened her resolve to flee. According to her journal, Constance had chosen April 15, 1666, as the date of her escape. A merchant convoy was expected to pass through Newfield on its way to Hartford, and she planned to slip away under the cover of its passage. In preparation, she had quietly collected evidence, earned a modest sum by selling her embroidery, and packed a small bundle of essentials. The night before her departure, she made one final, chilling entry in her journal. "I fear they suspect. Uncle O prepared a special tea this evening, insisting it would help me sleep. I pretended to drink but poured it away when his back was turned. If I do not reach Hartford, let whoever finds this journal know that the Pemberton brothers have grown rich through wickedness, and that I fear I am to be their next victim." What happened the following day has been pieced together from scattered accounts. Constance was seen early that morning near the village square, likely awaiting the convoy. Witnesses recall Jeremiah Peyton finding her there and speaking with her at length before leading her back in the direction of their home. By midday, Obadiah was summoning neighbors, claiming that his niece had wandered off in a fevered confusion. Yet several witnesses contradicted his version. Martha Gower, the blacksmith's wife, recalled Constance asking about the convoy's expected arrival and appearing calm, clear-eyed, and steady of voice. Elder John Pratt, who encountered her with Jeremiah, said she seemed troubled in spirit but showed no signs of illness. When he asked if she was well, it was Jeremiah who answered quickly, "The girl suffers from womanly humors that cloud her reason." The Peyton brothers then took charge of the search with strategic precision, dispatching search parties far from their property while Cornelius remained at home to receive news. For several crucial hours, no one approached the Peyton house, no one but the brothers themselves. What occurred during that time remains uncertain. However, later discovered entries in Obadiah's medical journal suggest Constance was administered a significantly stronger dose of the same elixir previously used to incapacitate others, this time with fatal intent. 3 days later, her body was discovered deep in the woods, nearly a mile from the Peyton home. Obadiah declared she had died of melancholy, the same affliction that had claimed her father, wandering into the wilderness in a delusional state. At her funeral, Jeremiah spoke with practiced sorrow about the mystery of divine providence and the tragedy of a young life lost. The matter might have ended there, just another sorrowful chapter in a time when early death was common, had it not been for goodwife Rebecca Wilson. While helping clean Constance's room after the funeral, Rebecca noticed a loose floorboard. Beneath it, she found the hidden journal. Unable to read, she gave it to her husband, Thomas Wilson, one of the few literate men in the settlement. After reading enough to grasp its implications, Thomas, deeply shaken, chose not to confront the Pembertons directly. Instead, he copied the journal and sent it with a trusted traveler to Hartford, addressed to the colonial authorities. His caution was justified. 2 weeks later, after dining at the Peyton home, supposedly to discuss legal matters, Thomas fell ill. Within days, he was dead, racked by visions and delirium. Witnesses recalled Jeremiah's solemn pronouncement, "It is the Lord's judgment on a guilty conscience." In Hartford, Constance's journal sparked a quiet but serious investigation. The authorities, wary of acting too boldly against men of the Pembertons' status and piety, proceeded with deliberate discretion. They sought out former residents of Newfield who had since resettled elsewhere and began tracking a disturbing pattern, one of inheritance, illness, and silence, all seeming to benefit the Peyton brothers again and again. For nearly 2 decades, colonial officials investigating the case encountered persistent challenges. Many potential witnesses feared spiritual repercussions for speaking out against men perceived as servants of God. Others hesitated out of concern for legal consequences should their accusations prove unfounded. The Peyton brothers had carefully cultivated their standing within the community, ensuring that for every individual who harbored suspicion, there were 3 who would vouch for their piety and moral integrity. Complicating matters further was the nature of the evidence. Constance's journal, while compelling, was the testimony of a young woman, a demographic often dismissed in colonial society as prone to hysteria or fanciful delusions. The seemingly suspicious pattern of inheritance could, to contemporary eyes, be justified as the natural result of the brothers' spiritual influence over the dying. Most troubling of all was the central accusation, that the Pembertons had been drugging the ill to manipulate their wills. Such a claim straddled the uncertain boundary between medicine and theology, territory most colonial magistrates were reluctant to navigate. Determined to build an irrefutable case, Hartford officials sent an undercover agent to Newfield in early 1667. Posing as a wealthy merchant suffering from a mysterious wasting illness, Thomas Bradford took up residence and soon came under the care of Dr. Obadiah Peyton. Bradford's secret reports to Hartford confirmed Constance's claims. Obadiah administered strange-tasting concoctions that left him confused and suggestible, during which Jeremiah steered conversations toward religious matters and matters of inheritance, while Cornelius prepared documents for signing. By the spring of 1667, the colonial authorities had gathered sufficient evidence to act. A delegation was dispatched to Newfield with orders to arrest the Pemberton brothers and search their property. But upon arrival, they found the settlement in chaos. The Pemberton home had burned to the ground the night before, reportedly killing all three brothers in their sleep. The timing was deeply suspicious. Yet with the primary suspects presumed dead and most physical evidence destroyed in the fire, the investigation came to a halt. The story might have ended there, buried in colonial records and forgotten, had it not been for a startling discovery in the spring of 1668. As the new owner of the Pemberton property began clearing the ruins, workers uncovered a hidden cellar that had survived the blaze. Inside were hundreds of vials containing dried chemical residues, journals dating back to 1647 that detailed the brothers' methods and victims, and a collection of personal items belonging to Constance Pemberton, including strands of her hair and fingernail clippings, apparently used to administer poisons undetected. The most damning find was a final journal entry in Cornelius's hand, dated the day before the fire. The girl's journal has been found. Wilson has betrayed us. Hartford will send men. All must be cleansed by fire, and we must begin anew elsewhere. Providence has guided us this far and will not abandon us now. The discovery sent shockwaves through the colony and triggered a widespread manhunt. Descriptions of the Pemberton brothers were circulated across New England, and security was tightened at ports and along main roads. Yet despite these efforts, no confirmed sightings were ever recorded. The ultimate fate of the Pemberton brothers became one of colonial America's enduring mysteries. Some historians believe they fled to the southern colonies or even returned to England under false identities. Others suggest a darker theory, that they did perish in the fire, perhaps accidentally while attempting to destroy the evidence, or perhaps they were secretly executed by those who wished to suppress a scandal that could shake public trust in religious leadership. Intriguing clues emerge from colonial Virginia records. In 1670, three men, brothers named Preston, settled in Jamestown. One opened an apothecary, another began a legal practice, and the third established a modest chapel. Their descriptions matched the estimated ages and appearances of the Pemberton brothers. More ominously, their arrival was soon followed by a string of deaths among wealthy colonists, all of whom reportedly experienced divine visions before revising their wills. By 1673, local authorities had begun to investigate these mysterious events. The Prestons vanished overnight, leaving behind a sealed room filled with equipment eerily similar to that described in the infamous Newfield investigation. Meanwhile, parish records from Bristol, England, reveal the arrival of three middle-aged brothers named Penworth in 1675. They claimed to be returning from the American colonies with considerable wealth. The Penworths quickly embedded themselves in Bristol society. One became a respected physician, another took holy orders, and the third practiced law. Together, they gained notoriety for their charitable work with the terminally ill, particularly those with wealth but no direct heirs. Their benevolence, however, came to an abrupt end in 1683 when a mysterious fire consumed their shared residence. No bodies were recovered. It was yet another suspicious blaze, one that conveniently erased all evidence. Whether the Penworths were the same individuals as the vanished Prestons, or perhaps aliases of the notorious Pemberton brothers from Newfield, remains speculative. Yet, the patterns are unmistakable: coordinated expertise, strategic disappearances, and exploitation of the dying. The implications suggest the Pembertons may have operated for decades, migrating and refining their methods across regions and identities. What is known for certain is the long-lasting impact of their deception. In 1670, the Connecticut colonial legislature passed what became known as the Witness Statute. This law mandated multiple unrelated witnesses for any deathbed changes to a will and forbade anyone set to benefit from acting as a witness. The statute explicitly cited the prevention of fraud via claims of divine revelation, a direct counter to the Pembertons' fraudulent practices. Over the following generations, the case faded from public consciousness. It survived mainly in obscure legal texts and occasional private letters. By the mid-18th century, It had become a cautionary tale whispered to law students and medical apprentices, a grim reminder of the dangers that arise when spiritual authority, medical knowledge, and legal power converge without checks. If you're finding this as unsettling as I did while researching, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe for more forgotten tales from America's dark past. And let me know in the comments, have you come across similar stories of religious exploitation in history? Now, let's turn to how the truth behind the Pemberton scandal finally resurfaced. The story might have remained buried in colonial archives forever, if not for the work of Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, a Yale historian specializing in early American medical practices. In 1998, while researching the origins of palliative care in colonial New England, Dr. Hawthorne stumbled upon cryptic references to the Pemberton case in the private papers of Jonathan Edwards, the famed 18th-century theologian. Edwards had apparently cited the case in his writings on the dangers of false spiritual authority. Intrigued, Dr. Hawthorne launched a deeper investigation. Her efforts led her to a misfiled archive box at the Connecticut Historical Society. Inside were the original documents from the Pemberton investigation, witness testimonies, copies of the brothers' journals, and most remarkably, Constance Pemberton's personal diary, preserved as part of the court's evidence. What makes the Pemberton case invaluable to historians isn't just the scandal itself, but what it exposes about colonial society. In 17th-century New England, medicine, religion, and law were deeply intertwined. The Pemberton brothers manipulated this triad masterfully. Their medical roles granted them access to the dying. Their religious facade shielded them from suspicion. And their legal credentials legitimized their fraudulent acquisitions. Modern analysis of the brothers' methods has been chilling. Their so-called Elixir of Divine Sight, described in detail within their journals, appears to have been a calculated mix of opium, belladonna, and other psychoactive plants native to New England. The dosages were tailored to the victim's weight and health, inducing a hallucinatory state, lucid enough to speak, yet vulnerable to suggestion. In 2002, Dr. Melissa Thornton, a medical historian at Johns Hopkins University, analyzed the Pembertons' recorded formulas. She concluded that the concoction revealed a surprisingly advanced understanding of neurochemistry for the 17th century. What makes the Pembertons' method so sophisticated, Dr. Thornton wrote, is not just the ingredients themselves, but the precision in ratios and timing of administration. It suggests these men were not merely opportunists, they were scientific minds operating in the shadows of an unsupervised society. The Pemberton brothers had developed what can only be described as an early form of truth serum, an insidious blend of hallucinogen and sedative, meticulously calibrated to induce a unique cognitive state. In this state, subjects remained verbally responsive yet highly suggestible, with their critical thinking severely impaired. This potent formula was the result of extensive experimentation and observation. Early journal entries document a series of precise adjustments, with detailed notes on how varying the ratios affected different individuals. One such entry from 1651 reads, "Increased tincture of belladonna by 5 drops for the Henderson widow, visions more vivid, but agitation excessive. Return to previous formulation, extend preparation by 2 days for similar subjects." What's particularly disturbing is the growing evidence that the brothers deliberately tested their concoctions on unsuspecting victims. Several journal entries describe how they administered various elixir versions to traveling strangers who sought shelter for the night. These individuals, never named, were seemingly chosen because their transient presence would not arouse lasting suspicion. Whether they departed the next day or vanished entirely, their absence drew no alarm. The Pembertons' methods reveal a chilling level of precision. Before dosing a subject, they would gather information about their religious beliefs, speech patterns, and property holdings. Then, under the influence of the drug-induced delirium, they would ask calculated, leading questions designed to produce divine revelations. These hallucinations were laced with personal details and tailored religious imagery, giving the illusion of a deeply spiritual, authentic experience. Even more unsettling is the suggestion that the Pemberton scheme was not their first. Early entries hint at previous experiments in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which had to be abandoned after drawing suspicion. This pattern of calculated relocation and refinement suggests a level of criminal sophistication far beyond opportunism. Their actions formed a premeditated enterprise, one cloaked in the authority of religion and designed to exploit the most vulnerable at their weakest moments. The Pemberton case illustrates how religious authority, in a time when doubting spiritual experience was viewed as sin itself, could be manipulated for personal gain. Their method created a nearly flawless system of exploitation, preying on the credulous and the dying while masquerading as divine healers. After 1668, the historical record falls silent on the brothers, but local legends hint they may have resurfaced under new names. A 1682 case in Rhode Island describes three brothers named Preston who ministered to the dying with eerily similar methods. By 1690, reports from Philadelphia told of spiritual physicians who assisted wealthy patrons in receiving final visions, often followed by surprising changes in wills. Whether these were the Pembertons reborn or imitators inspired by whispered tales remains unknown. What is certain, however, is that their techniques became a blueprint for others, exploiting the same spiritual vulnerabilities across colonial society. Perhaps the most tragic element of the Pemberton saga is the fate of Constance. Historical documents confirm she was due to inherit a significant estate from her maternal grandmother upon turning 18, property in England worth more than everything the Pembertons had stolen over the years. According to their journals, the brothers planned to begin dosing her months in advance, escalating the effects until she experienced a divine revelation instructing her to sign over the inheritance, followed by a lethal overdose disguised as illness. Constance's discovery of their scheme and her attempted flight to Hartford marked a turning point that almost changed history. Had she succeeded in delivering her evidence, the Pembertons might have been exposed years earlier, saving untold victims. Instead, her death became just another in their long list of crimes, distinguished only by the fact that it eventually led to their downfall. In the centuries since, the Pemberton brothers have become a dark legend, a cautionary tale of how spiritual authority can be weaponized, and how silence in the face of abuse can enable monsters to thrive. The Pemberton case has been cited in legal scholarship as one of the earliest known examples of systematic inheritance fraud in American history. It has drawn attention from medical historians for its disturbing use of early pharmaceutical knowledge to carry out criminal acts, and for religious scholars, it remains a chilling reminder of the dangers of blind faith in spiritual authority. To this day, the land where the Pemberton home once stood remains undeveloped, a protected historical site in what is now Newfield, Connecticut. Locals still whisper of strange dreams and unease that afflict those who linger too long near the foundation stones, the only remnants of the house. Whether these experiences are rooted in psychological suggestion or something far more mysterious, no one can say. Like much of the Pemberton story, it's left to interpretation. What we do know is this: between 1647 and 1667, three brothers exploited the fear, faith, and vulnerability of a tight-knit colonial community. Through careful orchestration, they amassed wealth and influence, leaving behind dozens of ruined lives. Their methods were centuries ahead of their time, blending scientific knowledge, religious manipulation, and legal maneuvering with chilling precision. As you listen to this account, you may ask, how did this go unnoticed for 2 decades? The answer lies in the world the Pembertons inhabited. A world where questioning religious visions was seen as heretical. Where medicine was primitive and unregulated. Where legal records were sparse, and authority often resided in the hands of the few. In such a world, trust was survival, and suspicion, especially toward respected figures, was dangerous. In many ways, the Pemberton brothers' story acts as a mirror, reflecting our timeless susceptibility to those who prey on belief, fear, and trust. The details may change across the centuries, but the human vulnerabilities they exploited remain constant. Our fear of death, our yearning for divine favor, our tendency to trust authority, our hesitation to challenge those who speak in the name of higher powers. If this tale has sent a chill down your spine, share it with someone who loves true historical mysteries, hit the like button, and subscribe so you never miss another exploration into the shadows of our past. But before you go, consider this. Do you believe the Pemberton brothers truly perished in that fire, or did they escape, continuing their dark work elsewhere, under new names? Leave your theory in the comments below. Because the true power of this story isn't in its eerie elements, it's in its plausibility. The uncomfortable reality that something like this could happen, did happen, and might still happen, cloaked in modern forms, wherever power goes unchallenged. The Pemberton brothers remind us that the most terrifying monsters are not always supernatural, they are often ordinary people who learn to weaponize our deepest beliefs. As a final note, Dr. Hawthorne's research continues at Yale, where she and her team are working to compile a complete list of the Pemberton victims and trace surviving family lines. Their work is not just about history, it's about long overdue justice, about restoring lost voices to our collective memory. So the next time you pass an old church or colonial cemetery, pause. Not just to reflect on faith and community, but to remember those who may have exploited both for darker purposes. Because in the shadows of even our most sacred institutions, predators have always found ways to hunt, counting on our reluctance to believe that evil can wear the face of respectability, and speak the language of faith.